All right, everyone, welcome back. Thank you so much. Hopefully you had a chance to do a couple of jumping jacks and get your blood flowing a little bit. It is my privilege to welcome Alison McCaffrey to join us. She is the person who has inspired so much of this work and is spending every waking minute working on redistricting. So I'm excited for you to get to hear from Alison today. Alison, welcome and thank
Thanks
you
for
for
having me.
joining us.
Thanks everybody who is spending this Saturday afternoon learning about maps. And hopefully we'll give your brain lots to think about and you can go get outside when we're done here. As Casa said, I'm Alison McCaffrey. I am the issue chair for redistricting for the League of Women Voters of Washington State. And I have been working on or learning about redistricting since '06 when I helped my grandmother write her book. She was a 4-term state representative who led the first comprehensive redistricting of Washington State since statehood in 1965. So with that, I helped her write her book. And then in about 2017, I started getting into redistricting, the current state of redistricting, and became the issue chair to try to drive some of this work that we're doing now. The Speak Up School team has been amazing. Thank you. Casa's on the state team, and Lori and Chelsea have been helping with the King County Speak Up School. So thank you so much for that. We are in module 3 right now, and happy to take questions in the chat. If there's something that needs a little bit more explanation, maybe raise the hand and we can make sure there's time for you to unmute. I think we'll see how questions go, but we'll probably try to end by 2:30 to make sure you get out on time. Happy to stay more and answer questions or look at the maps if you've got some detailed questions after 2:30, but we'll honor the time that we said. With that, let me share my screen. Okay. So thank you all for being part of Speak Up School. I think it's amazing to see how many people are joining us. We've had over 600 people in my rough count join us in Speak Up Schools all over the state. We are in module 3, which we're calling Data Lenses. And it's based on a project that I led over the last couple of years, the Washington Redistricting Data Lens Project. And it's really to just start you down the path of getting more ideas about what you might testify on, looking at districts in different ways. So yeah, let me know. Casa, are you the one that's going to track chat for questions?
Yes, I can.
Okay, that'd be great. Let me know if I miss any of them. So as I said, I am the league issue chair, but I'm also executive director of Politics the Possible in Action. And the Data Lenses project was sponsored by my nonpartisan nonprofit that is partnering with the league. I wear many hats, but we are a nonprofit that inspires civic engagement through storytelling. And if you've seen the announcements to our play, Many Maps, we're going to have a public premiere next Saturday afternoon. You can sit back and relax and learn about redistricting through a fun stage play that we videoed. So look for that. Again, we're here on module 3, trying to just give you more materials for your content. And my goals are to increase your understanding of redistricting by looking at specific examples in Washington State and explore the different demographics of this state and see what we can learn about voting power, about how we live and what our different identities are. and really think about that voting power in terms of, if we were just to look at a demographic in one way, how would we be able to change the voting power specifically? And then again, trying to explore what you might say about your own districts. So we'll just start off with a poll.
Allison, we don't have it. So would you ask people to respond in
Just
chat?
respond in chat. How much, sitting here right now, how much do you think redistricting impacts your ability to elect the person that you want to represent you? We'll give you a few minutes and I will open my chat again. A ton. Catherine says, yeah. A lot more than 50%. Yeah. So it looks like we've got people convinced, which is good, that redistricting really, where you draw the lines, really does affect, not only just can your candidate win, but does your candidate even run in the district? That's really quite interesting to hear people say, no way, travel time's way too hard. It's way too expensive to try to run in this district. Or, half my family lives in the district next door. Why would I run? Those kinds of things. So great. We've got a good group of people that don't need to be convinced how important this is. So this is really inspired because we do get a lot of questions about, what would I say? Why would it make a difference? Would I, it's all gerrymandered anyway. I'm just cynical. So what should I say? But I am definitely one that is advocating your voice may seem like a small voice, but if they all add up, then we are a chorus and we are giving the commissioners this loud song of what our districts really should look like. So it's so important to add your voice to the total chorus. All right, so let's talk data lenses specifically. When I was first starting the project of how would we influence the map drawing itself, because we have worked on the process by which the commissioners go through, but the map drawing itself, we said, well, we want to be, quote, fair, right? But what does that mean? The maps are clearly biased by the existing maps. They tend to just tweak the districts that we already have based on population. And we don't want to use partisan ideas to look at maps. We're the League of Women Voters, right? This isn't going to work. So what could we use that was going back to first principles in order to have a basis for drawing our maps? And that's where this data lenses concept came from. It said, let's look at the demographics of our state. And we know if we just piled on everything, it would be way too complex. So let's just take one demographic at a time and see how that might look if we were to draw lines based on those demographics only. So we are exploring the district lines and changing the district lines, and we're examining how voting power might change in if we do change those lines, given certain lenses that we're looking at. We also wanted to just ask ourselves critical questions, to use it as an advocacy tool as we're going out there in the community saying, what kind of questions should we ask? So certainly education and advocacy, this was all geared towards being a tool for you to use, both for your own understanding and your own testimony, as well as you speak to your neighbors and your and other folks that are looking and thinking about redistricting. So you can get to the website, which is the Data Lenses Project, fairly simply. It is just, I put a teeny URL shortcut to it. So if you just go to tinyurl.com/data lenses, you can pull up, oops, that was to CASA directly, that won't work. You too can pull up any of these maps that I'm gonna walk us through this afternoon. So we looked at these 5 lenses. They seem to be the most prominent when people talked about redistricting. That was the kinds of things that we knew we wanted to look at: race and ethnicity. That's normally what commissioners think of when they think of communities of interest. But of course, we don't define it in our state law at all. So it really is anything that people say it is. Household income, and turns out education level is highly correlated with household income. So those maps were pretty similar. So we show a demographic of household income. Tribal affiliations, we've got strong advocacy among our major tribes to keep their tribal lands in single legislative districts and not split them in congressional districts either. So we thought that that's important to look at. Environment is my favorite one, because climate change is such a crucial issue, and yet do we think about it when we think about voting districts? So lots more to think about there. And then industry employment, so where people are employed. Clearly businesses have lots of interest and lots of sway, right? So let's look at that and see what that might tell us. So we created these 6 maps. So these are GIS maps. Some people call them heat maps. The darker the color means the higher percentage of whatever demographic you're looking at. And it just gives you a sense of where people live. And from a larger and smaller perspective as you zoom in and out of the maps. We knew we wanted to make them interactive as well. And I do want to thank Integral GIS. They're a Seattle-based GIS firm, and they donated all their time to making these maps. So it was fun to work with them, and they're great folks if you ever get a chance to work with them again. Let's just go back to our gerrymandering example, that if those of you who came to my redistricting 101, you might remember this example. So here's our hypothetical state that has, we know everybody's party affiliation, and we've got to split it into 4 districts of 20 people each. So just write in the chat how you might split up this hypothetical state. And I know some of you are leaning in and counting all the little dots. It doesn't need to be that detailed, right? Anyone got an idea? This just reminds us about gerrymandering. No ideas, anyone? You can see that we've got lots of reds in the lower right. Maybe that's, do a quadrant, Anne says, or diagonal lines. Yeah. So the engineer in me would love quadrants, right? Right down the middle, right across the middle going the other way, right? But look what that would do to maybe that city in the middle with all of the blues. That might crack those blues and not give them a chance to vote in the people they want in any of the districts. Adele's saying clump the lower right. Yeah, maybe that's a rural area. It would make sense, right? To say, oh, those folks have lots of things in common. Melissa's saying, okay, let's make a district for the city. But then are the blues packed together in the city, and then the reds would win around the other areas. So not so simple when you're saying, hey, let's do this fairly. And this is a fairly simple example. So let's just gerrymander the heck out of it and do a gerrymander for each side. Then we might see it look something like this. And you can see on the left, we've got a gerrymander for the Democrats, and on the right, we've got a Republican gerrymander. Right. And so if our hypothetical state house has 4 members in it, right? On the left, you'd have 3 Democrats and 1 Republican, and on the right, you'd have 1 Republican, or 1 Democrat and 3 Republicans. So you can see that where you draw the lines matters. And if you think about it, those blue and reds could represent any split of folks, right? It could be the Alison party and the non-Alison party. It could be people of color and white people, right? There's lots of ways in which you can do this. What we're talking about here with data lenses goes beyond this simple cracking and packing of gerrymandering, because we know that that's the obvious extremes when we get to states, and we've seen other states that have some of that. Our commission being equal to Democrats and 2 Republicans, we don't end up having one party or the other have control and be able to gerrymander that way. So there's lots to do in the nuance in the middle. So this data lens is going beyond just that extremeness of just packing and cracking. We want to talk percentages of people in districts that might give you more or less voting power of whatever minority you might be talking about, not just racial or ethnic minority, but whatever that minority is. Duffy's saying lines would be squiggly. Yeah, we don't like squiggly lines for some reason, right? Like that just seems like it's gerrymandered. And it's really interesting. People send me all this stuff all the time about shapes of districts. There's an alphabet made out of district shapes, and there's jewelry. You can buy earrings based on district shapes and whatnot. Like everybody's like they're proposing like a Tinder app, like, is it gerrymandered or not? Swipe left, swipe right. Turns out with all the data, the shape of the district is less important, because you could have a beautifully compact district and it really could be gerrymandered depending on how clever your computer algorithms are. Julie's asking about redistricting 101. Yeah, we are going to have a couple more sessions of redistricting 101. And I am working on video presentations that will take redistricting 101 and chunk it up into 5 or 10 minute sessions that I'm going to make available here in the next month or so. Okay, so I do want to make sure that we talk about the complexities of this subject, right? We all know that every one of us has multiple identities. And when we're talking about people of color or low income people, we make general statements, but I just want to admit right away that, we're all complex folks, and which part of our identity we might choose to advocate for could be one thing today, another thing tomorrow. That could be a blend and a balance, right? We're all complex human beings. But to try to simplify it and get our brain around it, sometimes we talk about things in a certain way. The other thing that we know is true is everybody with the same identity doesn't always vote the same way. And yet there has been historically, say, ethnic patterns of voting, and Latino people like to vote for Latino candidates. There are some of that. So we want to acknowledge that, but also have the caveat that we know we're not making a universal statement about any one given category. I just want to be humble about that. We want to honor the complexities of people while we're trying to piece this thing apart. Okay, so let's talk voting power in the more detailed sense. So here's 4 examples of how. Now my example is a state with 10 districts, and we've got 1,000 people, or you could add 3 zeros, right? And be 1 million people, right? The dynamics would be the same, but think of it as 1,000 people where 70% overall are in a majority and 30% are in a minority. And again, I'm not specifically saying race or ethnicity, it's just any kind of numerical minority. If you did like in example A, you would have an even spread. And here we're just looking at the numbers in a district. We're not actually thinking about the geography of it yet. And you'd say, well, okay, that would make sense. There's an even spread. Then the majority would win in every district. And that doesn't seem quite right, even though, it's kind of like we don't do districts by male and female, right? Because we spread ourselves in such a way that men and women are, residing next to each other, right? There'd be no way to make a female only district geographically. Massachusetts is another example of this, where the Republicans are about 30% of Massachusetts, but they're spread out in so many different towns that you can't make a Republican congressional district in Massachusetts. Or if you did, it would be extremely weird, be like octopus kind of thing. So then in example B, we have what we call the segregated example. Okay, so now I say, okay, the minorities want some control. Let's go have two districts that are all the minorities. We just put 100% in that district. And then, I don't know, there's a few people that get spread out between other districts. So then clearly that minority would be able to elect people that they wanted in those districts where they had all the voting power. But at the chamber level, right, going up a level, there's still only 2 out of 10. So they wouldn't be able to have enough power at the chamber level to write the laws and set the agenda and those kinds of things. Then we get to C, which is the proportional example, which to us, I don't know, us in the US, we love this because we think, well, if the overall blend votes, say, are 70-30, then why shouldn't the seats in our chamber reflect that as well? And there's many reasons why our first past the post kind of elections systems doesn't allow us to do that. But this is how you would split up. You'd say, oh, well, if I could make the districts such that, 3 districts the minority can pretty much guaranteed controlling those and whatnot, then the dynamic at the state house level, for example, still has the majority having most of the power and being able to vote in to vote the agenda and vote in laws that they would want, even though we're proportional, right? Then if we go all the way to D, right, now we're maximizing the voting power of that 30% minority, right? We're saying, let's be diligent and make districts. And again, we don't know how people live in this hypothetical one, so that the minority can eke out a slight majority in 5 of those districts. Then we'd have a state voting chamber that maybe would be 5 and 5. And that would be a very different dynamic at that level if your 30% overall minority had 50% of the districts. Is that making sense? Are there any questions about this kind of voting power examples? Let it sink in a little bit. And when we're looking at our districts coming up, we're kind of looking at, oh, how are we tweaking it in between these kind of examples? Okay, happy to take questions when they come to you, for sure. You'll see on the Data Lenses website, we used these types of histograms to try to analyze, were we able to shift the voting power of whatever demographic we were looking at? For example, this is a histogram for the people of color map. And you'll see down at the bottom, that's the percentage of people of color in the district. And then the histogram is how many districts had those. So you'll see when we redrew districts looking at grouping people of color in a different way than our current districts, we were able to shift, I think it was a total of 8 districts to higher percentage people of color. So you would think, oh, then they have more voting power if more of the districts have them at a higher percentage. And of course, that percentage that's over 50% is kind of interesting. In the first example, we had, I think we just had, there's one at 49, but we had 5 districts that were over 50%. And in the second example, we were able to get it to 7. There's one, that one histogram is like between 44 and 51. So we were just able to nudge it a little bit in terms of who had more than 50%. So you can stare at these when you're staring at the map and just see in those analysis how we were able to shift it. These maps are not conclusive. They're just example maps. They're by no means legal maps because there's lots more involved when you're the redistricting commission and you have to take in account all of the criteria. We're just looking at one criteria in this in these examples. Okay, so I mentioned the critical questions in the opening, but these are the kinds of things that came up as we were looking at these maps. Just the very question to ask the community, well, what amount of voting power seems like it would help you in terms of actually having influence with your elected officials? What do we know about the dynamics of that voting area? How much does a certain group vote in the same way? How does our intersectionality balance? And how can we use this information to influence our commissioners through our testimony? Okay, Catherine wrote a couple of sentences here. Yeah, it's interesting. Catherine's talking about the history of the very beginning. We were trying to kind of reject the fact that we would have political parties, and it's all interesting, the founding fathers and Washington being president and all of those kinds of things. But once we started having factions, they weren't quite parties, then there was this gerrymandering tendency, right? I wanted to draw districts to help my side, my faction out. And when we're thinking about it from a community interest standpoint, it's kind of complex because we don't always live in our community of interest group, maybe. Again, we don't all vote the same way, perhaps, but we may find things that we have in common, like the environmental lens. When we get to that, I think of people that live on 2 sides of a river. Those people have an interest in not polluting that river. And if one set of legislators is on one side and another set of legislators is on the other side, then they could have competing interests between the 2 sides of the river. But the salmon in the river, don't care if one side pollutes and the other side doesn't. They're going to get the pollution. Yeah, so the history about this is all very interesting. Okay, so here's the crux. I know you want to get to the maps. So data lenses maps. There's 6 maps, and every one of them has the existing districts on the left-hand side and the new districts that we drew on the right-hand side. And there's a big white bar, I made it pink in this slide, that you can grab and click with your mouse, and you can slide it back and forth. And you can show, and you can see how they might have changed given the grouping by whatever data lens you're looking at. So with that, I will go to actual site, which means I'm gonna share my web browser. It helps to have good bandwidth when you're looking at these, but be patient. It does take time to redraw.
Feels like we need a drum roll, everybody.
Okay, so this is, are you seeing the site there, Casa? So this
Yes.
is the Redistricting Data Lenses Project site. And it's, all you do is scroll down to see everything. Right here at the beginning, this is my tabs that'll jump you down to different sections. I highly recommend you read through the beginning. We did spend lots of time trying to set up the project so you can get our thoughts on it. If you just can't wait to, but you want to look at the maps, you click on the data lenses and that takes you to the maps directly. And here's our 5 data lenses and 6 maps from those. And then you scroll down, you see these white boxes, right, with the maps in it. It does allow you to manipulate the maps in here, but I highly recommend you click on this little box in the upper right of the map, and that will open up a new browser window. And it'll just load faster and be bigger on your screen if you open up a new browser window with the map in it. So I will go there. I've done that already. It's like a cooking show. And the muffins come out of the oven. So here's our data lens map. We're looking at the people of color map. Right here, you can see this is this white line that I can move back and forth. And you can use a scroll on this to zoom in and out, but it's really sensitive, so it's kind of annoying. So I recommend that you go here and just use these plus and minus, and then wait for it to load. You can click and hold and drag the map south to reposition. And again, here's this bar, and you can see how those district lines are changing. Here on the left-hand side, we've got the existing legislative districts. And then as we move around, we say, oh, let's do it differently. And there's that. You've got the legend on the upper left, right? So you can see the darkest blue is 40% or more of people of color in that census tract. This is all based on 2017 American Community Survey data. So obviously, as we get new data, that might change, but I think for these purposes, this is just to give you an idea. So the trends in all these areas are very similar. So it's not going to change significantly in terms of the trends that we're looking at for the 2020 data, when that's going to be the actual data that the commissioners use. And yes, we can zoom in as detailed as we want, which we will do. So let's go to a zoomed in. So you can see we're now in Elliott Bay, right? And I thought this is an interesting by census tract, right? You can see all the little lines. This was an interesting in kind of North Seattle neighborhoods. You've got a dark spot here, which is the University of Washington, interestingly enough. So students, remember the census counts folks where they live and sleep most of the time. So you've got students and maybe some lower income staff that live near the university. And you've got some spots up here. So actually the university itself is split. Does someone live near the university where the 46th and the 43rd districts split?
Yep.
Kind of interesting there. But let me point out this detail box. You see, I clicked on an area and it pulls up the data of that district. And the very bottom is the existing, on the left-hand side is the existing district number. So you can tell where you are. If you need to figure out where you are in more detail, you can zoom in and out, and you can see how it redraws the map. You can see that. We couldn't figure out how to get the transparency well enough. So that's my ideas. If you need to figure out where you are, just zoom in and out and have it redraw. So I can click on this area here and it says, oh, I'm in the 43rd. I'm kind of University of Washington on the west side. But then as I pull my white line across, I can say, oh, I changed the districts. Oh, now they're in a new district. It's kind of a crazy shape. That's why these are not legal too. They're not compact in some ways. But it'll tell you how the demographics switch. I do need to do a caveat about the percent on the partisan lines. These are done by county election results. And so they're not very disaggregated. And so it's a very rough estimate of the percent Democrat and Republican. Those of you who know areas better will know that these are, and they're based on the statewide races, which we know have different characteristics than legislative races. So, but it does give you kind of a sense if that's important to you. We were focusing more on the demographics of the other ones. So that's kind of the functioning of the map in detail, but this is the kind of thing that how I use it, right? I might focus in on, we can see that South King County definitely has, we know at the bottom of the lake, right? There's a lot more low income folks. You can see mostly dark, over 40%, mostly low income, mostly people of color in that area. You can zoom in as detailed as you want to find where your lines are. I'm realizing in this one, it's hard to see the lines in the dark areas, but you can zoom in and see where that works. Yeah, so this is kind of interesting. I might put the University of Washington in a different, split in a different way. I think there's, I'm forgetting the area here, but there's a lot of working class folks that live in this area, and they're kind of split between a bunch of different districts, the 32nd and the 46th here. As we pull across, you know, what if we grouped those folks together? How would that be different for our communities, right? We could do that different. So that's communities of color lens. Let me go to, we also have the Hispanic/Latino lens. So here's another, I'm in South King County area, right? And there's different populations that for me, I didn't know that there was a larger Hispanic area out here in east of Kent kind of thing. Maybe that's the Fife area down here. So that'd be interesting to explore and see as we move it across, what if we changed which area those folks were in, or which district those folks were in. We'll just zoom up a little bit. So remember this one we're looking at is Latino only, and the darker areas means 40% or more Latino. So I will just jump through some other areas, and I'm happy to take some example areas. I know one that I get asked about all the time is the 37th and the 11th, because the 11th is kind of a crazy district, right? You can see it, I've got it outlined here now. And and this one here is the 37th, right? So clearly there was a choice of how to split up this South Lake Union, South King County area. You could draw districts that went, you know, that was a northern district and a southern district, versus this choice was to go kind of an east-west and have the 11th wrap around to pick up enough population. Remember, there's the goal here is always equal population based on the data. So interestingly here for these two, as we were just trying to group, looking at income, and we were trying to group it differently, what it might look like. What if it was something like this? We made a kind of a crazy district in this one that tried to pull up, let's do this district, right? That tried to pull and match all of these kind of 20% low income to 40% low income. And for low income, we were using household income of 40K or less. And you can see it's dramatically different. You can draw these shapes that are dramatically different given where the census data is telling us. Okay, I see some folks commenting, so.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Anne, would you like to go ahead and unmute and ask your question? Should we follow it?
Yeah, I'm in the 34th, and we have had in the past where a legislator actually got put into our district from the 11th because of the movement of lines. And it just seems to me that there might be some consideration about historical historically that this was X district, and that you're trying to maintain those historical, although political lines.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a consideration? Or, I mean, obviously with population changes, which I'm sure the 34th will have,
Right.
that something like that could happen. Vashon, for example, could go over to the other side of the sound.
Right. The commissioners could choose right now, and historically, I think somebody could research that for me, has been with West Seattle kind of folks, and that's where someone in West Seattle should say, or someone from Vashon Island should say, if that makes the most sense to group folks together. Maybe it's a commuter, it's a wealth level, right? We've got fairly, looking at our income here, right? We've got fairly higher low percentages of low income in these two, right? Vashon might not want to be with rural Kitsap County on the other side if they thought they didn't have as much in common. If most people are traveling to Seattle for jobs or something, say that. I think that's what we want to hear from the community is what makes sense. And I think, Anne, in our conversations before, we had talked about where this line is between the 34th and the 33rd is really fascinating. I think that's the detail that folks in this area here really should talk about. What makes sense in terms of where this line should be? Should we do fatter districts, pick up more people from the east, and or should we do narrower districts? Well, is it the beachfront folks that all have stuff in common, but maybe that's the wealthier side, so you want to balance your tax base? All of those kinds of questions are really interesting, and honestly, it's only the people who live there that can answer that. What is your community, and what would you like to see in terms of who's going to represent you, right? Those kinds of things. Yeah, and the boundaries are always, there's always, this has been back behind the scenes lobbying to make sure legislators stay in their districts, and it seems just, slimy to us, but it's still an inherently political process. When we interviewed the past commissioners, they said, oh, we weren't protecting incumbents, we were honoring the voters who voted for those incumbents, which was kind of a back way of saying you're protecting the incumbent. So we need to be loud about how we might want that different, and but be realistic that we're probably not going to draw Speaker Jenkins out of her district. That map's just not going to fly. So it's a balance of understanding the community needs and the reality of the commission structure we've got. Melissa.
Yeah, I'm curious for your thought, because I am really irritated that incumbents' locations are taken into account at all. What tools do we have around advocacy to influence the extent that that's taken into account? Is there anything that can be advocated for that binds the commission, or that would strongly influence the commission to say, this is how incumbents' current residential addresses should be taken into account?
Well, interestingly, the law says they can't do that. So nobody's going to admit that they've ever done that. And so it was so this backwards, like, we protecting the voters of the people who voted for that person, it seemed strange to us, because you cannot favor a party or group, and clearly taking the legislator's address in mind is doing that. So our biggest advocacy tools are, here's what our community wants. This makes sense from the lines. And if that means that so-and-so has to run in a different district, we're not, that's just the reality of it. So the stronger we can make a case for why the district should be drawn a certain way, the more that we can fight for that, and we stay loud about the positive. Because I just honestly don't think we're going to get anywhere saying, don't be naughty, right? They're just never going to.
I hadn't realized that was part of the law. That's hilarious, because I mean,
never going to admit they're being naughty, right? So
like, all you have to do is look at the maps to know what happened.
Yeah, there's examples of little carve outs, and there's a really famous Rasmussen finger. It was like 15 miles up to Rasmussen's house and then back down in the district. This was like in the 70s or something, right? It was just obvious, right? Not so obvious in this last couple of rounds, but there's still a few. I was at Mount Vernon. There's an obvious in the 39.
Yeah, there was one for Ruth Kagi too.
Ruth Kagi, yep. And so I think we just need to advocate, stop doing stupid wiggles. Even if it wasn't for a legislator, it looks like it is, right? So yeah, interesting. I've been going around with LWV US about, well, wait, I just got voter registration data that includes legislators' addresses. Shouldn't I check? Like, and the party line from the LWV is don't take it into account, right? That's clearly not what we want to do. But there's a real reality of the situation too. So yeah, I think our biggest advocacy is to be as loud as we can on a positive message of why the community needs to be a certain way. And maybe this, like, don't put a wiggle in, that just looks bad.
Yeah, I told them no pokey bits. I said, no pokey bits.
We're watching you. I mean, our hugest benefit is that we're watching you. We're gonna look at these maps, those kinds of things. Okay, Casa, who's up next for?
I would love for everybody to see the environment lens. Let's look at that one.
So this is my favorite one. As I was telling you, we draw county boundaries on rivers. So by definition, we're splitting watersheds. And then we put in our law, have the district lines follow the county lines. So we didn't have the resources to do a legislative map on environmental, but we did a congressional map. So here's our major eco regions. And Mr. Brian, if you could not draw on my map, somebody could clear it. And you can see it that our current congressional districts don't really match anything ecosystem, right? We clearly have a coastal region and we split that. We've got this high plain area in the yellow, what do they call it? Oh, the Columbia Basin, sorry. So it's kind of a high basin in the orange here, right? So what if we drew congressional lines that were more in line with these environmental ones? I do see the time. So maybe, how crazy would that be if we did congressional districts more like that? Then we'd have the Eastern Whatcom and Eastern Skagit and Snohomish people all the way over here with, with the northeastern part of the state. Hugely different, right? But then people would also argue there's no way to drive this district to campaign in it. You'd have to go down and around and back up. But it is fascinating to try to see. You could look at a microcosm, knowing the environmental factors in your area, why you might want to draw things different. And you know, down in my area in Tacoma, the Puyallup River waterway is hugely important to the tribes and the fishing in the area. Like, but we hack it all up because our political boundaries are different. And let me show you one more map.
Real quick, Allison, when you have this new proposed, it is taking into consideration equal population.
Yes. So we did roughly equal population on all these districts. That's the idea, is that you take that as the given, but then you kind of draw them differently based on what you're seeing. Yeah.
So the nice thing about this tool is that some of that is done for you.
Right.
And you can click in and get the little mini demographics box and assure yourself that that's the case. But this is the way to have some of that work done for you, where the tool is actually equalizing the districts, and then you get to see what happens.
Yeah, and it's an example. There's millions of ways you could draw them differently, right? But it's an example to get your brain going on how you might do it. Anne is making a comment that incumbents live in the heart. Yeah, so many incumbents, doesn't really matter where you might draw the lines as you kind of take the existing district and just shift if they're living in the center of it. But this is the point of these maps, is we have every right to radically change the maps. We're in the Yakima area, we're talking about going back to instead of 14th and 15th kind of east and west of each other, why not have them be north and south of each other, which would radically change the maps. So let's just look at the industry map. This is kind of cool, just because King County is the most interesting area for this because of our the industry that's there. So light blue is electronics and kind of high-tech manufacturing. And this maroonish dark color is traditional manufacturing. So think Boeing, think Microsoft, right? So what if we drew lines? These are congressional lines as well, but what if we drew lines that kind of boxed those in differently, right? That'd be radically different than what we do now if we looked at it from an industry standpoint. But there's no reason why you shouldn't at least examine that and say, what are the industries in my area? Wouldn't it be better from an employment standpoint if the people we elected really cared about this industry that matters to so many people who live there? And this one is where the people live and what industry they're in, not where the company is. That's a little nuance of this one. I just realized that I did not have the tribal affiliation one. So while we've got a few minutes, let's just jump to that. Again, you scroll through our data lenses and you, up one, and you can open your tribal. I will do that one. And this one's just interesting from an overall, the two tribes that are the biggest impacted because they've got the largest geographic area are the Yakima tribe south of the city of Yakima and the Colville tribe in the northeast of the state. It'd be interesting if there were other tribes. I'm thinking of like the Mukilteo tribe has a casino and lots of population down in, I don't know whether it's Northern Pierce or Southern, but which district they were in might make a difference. So you can see here in Yakima, the 14th and the 15th get split. And they're advocating strongly to make the Yakima reservation all in the 14th.
They're currently split, just for everybody.
Split, yes. And so that might look something like this, not splitting them. Yeah, so any other questions? I'll flip back to my slides, my ending slides. Really just is a tool of a tool for you to use to look around and look in your area.
Catherine, go ahead if you have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I understood from the presentation that the maps that this tool draws are legal from the point of population distribution. But the other 4 or 5 factors which are spelled out in the guidance to the commission, such as keeping other layers of government contiguous, are not taken into account by these maps. Is that right?
So we did, everything was contiguous and everything was roughly equal population. But we did not measure splitting of geographic or political boundaries. So that's your city and county. We didn't measure that in these maps. And those are things that the commission will have to take it into account. Yeah.
Okay, so the other two are, the other criteria that I remember that the commission is bound by are this idea of community, which these maps address directly.
Yep.
And then, you know, equal and fair representation, however that is interpreted, that's
Right.
a vague one, right? So it's really only, in terms of data, it's only the political boundaries that are missing.
Yeah, that we didn't take the time to analyze and try to minimize that for each one. And again, and the population as well, we didn't tweak it to a point to get, you know, if it was within 10% of each other, we didn't tweak that. It turns out it takes a long time to get it within like 5 people of each other kind of thing. So yeah, again, these are, I would not turn in any of these maps as a solution. They're just meant to get your juices flowing and to think about it from one of the lenses. Yeah.
And you get an A for remembering what we talked about this morning, Catherine.
She's on it, the criteria. Yeah, see the RCW. So we know that these showed dramatic new possibilities, and we can see that we can dramatically influence the voting power of those. Remember that when we're talking about electoral competition, another one of those criteria that they have to do, we're talking about more than just D's and R's. We're talking about different people being able to run, right? Whether it's the cost of running because transportation is so hard, whether a person of color thinks they even have a shot, so they will run, those kinds of things. Voting power is really how much is enough for your community. And if you're looking at, for example, the Latino community, if you can have a 60% voting district, maybe rather have 30 and 30 in 2 districts. And that's something only the community itself can answer, right? Whether you want that. And of course, in the end, the computer can't draw the maps, right? It is a human endeavor that we're inherently balancing and compromising. Quote, good redistricting maps means that nobody's super happy and nobody's pissed off, right? That it's a balance of all of the people in our state and a representation that feels like there's a chance for the maximum number of people to vote someone in that they want. How do we maximize that equation? And it's all about, it's inherently a human endeavor in that sense. So we would love to have more input. I think we talked about testimony questions. I'm going to skip the poll. We'd love to have more input from you. Here's some themes, and Casa can send out, or whoever can send out these. You can look at them later. I think you talked about them in the last session. It does look like that May to August is when the testimony is going to happen. They're saying they're going to have 32 meetings, which would be great if they had that many meetings. So we've got some time to develop our testimony and rally the troops around it. We're partnering with Representable. So if anybody wants to kind of get their head around their own testimony, this is a great website that you can answer 6 questions, and you can actually draw click a little map, and you can save it. And we're going to look at all those. So I will, when we close here, I'll put that in the chat as well, that link. But happy to, the more people who put something in Representable, the more I get it, and we can use it in terms of making our actual maps. I highly encourage people to use maps. This one is Dave's redistricting app. To try making your maps. You learn so much when you try to dig into the details. And I'll finish just with, your government only works if you participate. So thank you for being here, and happy to close, but also happy to stick around and answer questions.